Thank you so much, Tim. So are science and religion compatible? There's been lots of talks on this topic. And so hopefully what I'm going to say will bring something from the perspective of a philosopher and specifically an epistemologist. So that's the branch of philosophy that asks questions about the nature of evidence, rationality, and so on. So what do we mean when we ask this question of compatibility between science and religion? I think there are at least two types of compatibility that we might be interested in. The first is what we might call ethical compatibility. So we could ask questions such as, would it be compatible for a Christian to engage into research that yields things like nuclear weapons? Would stem cell research be compatible with being a Christian? Those are really interesting questions. But there's also what we might call epistemic compatibility. So this is the sort of question about whether there is some kind of rational tension between science and religion, whether there is some kind of evidence that is thrown up by science that is evidence against Christian theism. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on for the next 20 minutes. There's been all sorts that's been said in this debate, and I actually think you can boil down the objections to the epistemic compatibility between science and religion to really two fundamental charges or allegations. So the first is that science has discovered things, has discovered facts about the world which constitute evidence against theism. The second is that science is gradually making God redundant as an explanation. Science is edging God out and is yielding explanations that are sufficient to account for everything, perhaps one day. Now, the thing is that evidence, anything that is evidence against some hypothesis is at the same time evidence for some other hypothesis. So there's an implicit comparison that's going on here between theism and some other hypothesis, some other grand worldview. What is that other hypothesis or worldview? Well, it's one that's come up already. John talked about it quite a lot, and that is that the worldview of naturalism. Now, naturalists like to present their view as a sort of brave new worldview. I don't think it's very new at all, actually. It goes back at least as far as the Greek atomists, figures like Democritus, Epicurus, who held that basically what reality is at bottom is a bunch of atoms swerving in the void. So really, you can see very strong resemblances between this picture of reality and the picture of reality of modern day materialists or naturalists. Let's just look at three accounts by contemporary philosophers of what naturalism consists in. So Peter van Inwagen says that a naturalist is someone who says that there is nothing besides nature, nothing in addition to nature, nothing outside or beyond nature. Nature, in the sense that interests us, is simply another name for the physical universe or the cosmos. Naturalism is therefore the thesis that all things are physical things. Eric Wielenberg says that in a naturalistic universe there is no God, no afterlife, and no immortal soul. According to naturalism, intelligent design played no role in the formation of the universe. And one more from John Searle, who says that the world consists entirely of entities that we find it convenient, though not entirely accurate, to describe as particles. These particles exist in fields of force and are organized into systems. Examples of systems are mountains, planets, H2O molecules, rivers, crystals, and babies. So, in summary, naturalism, I think, can be captured by the following three theses. There is no God, no souls, no afterlife. And another claim about the origin of things, there is no intentional design behind things. And a more positive claim that all that exists is physical, even that which appears to be non-physical, such as mental states, consciousness. Naturalism, I think, could be compared to the thought that the fundamental constituents of physical reality are like Lego blocks, and everything that exists, according to naturalism, has to be able to be built out of these fundamental constituents. these fundamental Lego blocks. So let's return to the two charges that I've suggested are being brought against theism. The first being that science has discovered things which are evidence against theism and by implication for naturalism. The second one, that science is gradually making God redundant as an explanation, and naturalistic explanations, one that appeal only to physical entities and forces, are, or at least eventually will be, sufficient to explain everything. Okay, so for the remainder of the talk, I'm going to begin to address these two charges and consider what might be said about them. But before we go any further, I'd like to talk a little bit about how epistemologists might think about the concept of evidence and how it works. So this equation is what's known as Bayes' theorem, or at least it's a form of Bayes' theorem known as the odds form. I'm not going to go deeply into the different components of that, but this allows us to give a formal definition of evidence. So a fact E is evidence for hypothesis 1 and against a hypothesis 2, to the extent that E is more probable, that's to say it's more what you'd expect to find given hypothesis 1 than given hypothesis 2. So that's a little bit abstract. So let's illustrate that with a slightly silly, mundane example. Okay, so here is the evidence that we're going to consider. Our new next door neighbors have left us a nice gift, a box of chocolates. And we're going to consider two hypotheses, and we're going to consider the extent to which E is evidence for or against these hypotheses. So hypothesis 1 is that our new neighbors want to be friends with us. Hypothesis 2 is that our new neighbors don't want to be friends with us. And the question that we are going to ask ourselves is, given hypothesis 1, that they want to be friends with us, how likely is this evidence? How likely is it that they would leave us these chocolates? And then we're going to ask the question, given hypothesis 2, given that the hypothesis they don't want to be friends with us, how likely is it that they would leave us this gift? And we are going to then compare the answers to those two questions. So I suggest that this would be a plausible way of filling things in. So given the hypothesis they want to be friends with us, it's, let's say, something like 50-50 that they would leave some kind of gift for us when they move in. Okay? But given that they don't want to be friends with us, it seems pretty unlikely that they would leave a nice box of chocolates for us. Okay? That seems fairly plausible, right? And so, according to Bayes' theorem, when we sort of take into account that evidence, we do what's called conditionalizing on the evidence. We then knock out all of those white spaces, those bits of the bar where they didn't leave us any chocolates. So now we've taken that evidence into account, and we can see that hypothesis 1 has become much more probable than hypothesis 2, because hypothesis 1 made the evidence much more likely than hypothesis 2. And if you want to see how this works numerically, I won't go through this in any detail, but when you plug numbers into the formula, this is how it works. Okay, so let's apply this to a little case study. So as I said, I think that one of the charges against Christian theism is that science has uncovered facts about the world that are evidence against theism and are evidence for naturalism. And we can use this basic framework that I've sketched to help frame our thinking. And I should just be clear that the numbers are, it's of course artificial to put such precise numbers on these things. But at least in terms of the big picture, the sort of sense of something being much more likely given this hypothesis than given this hypothesis, I think we can come to plausible judgments. So the evidence that we're going to consider now is this, that there is a vast and very old universe in which life is sort of peripheral. This has sometimes been talked about as the argument from scale. The idea that when we, found out just how big the universe was, that somehow was very bad news for theism. My late grandfather once told me that this was one of his main reasons for not believing in God. The fact that the universe is so old and we've come along at sort of 1 second to midnight, as he put it. So the question is this fact, is E, more what you'd expect to find given theism or given naturalism? And the claim put forward by naturalists is that this large old universe, vast indeed old universe, is not what you'd expect on theism. You'd expect a small, young universe in which we're at the center. Whereas on naturalism, you very much would expect this big, big universe in which life is very rare. Now, I want to suggest there are a couple of underlying assumptions here that are very much open to challenge. So one is that the biblical picture is one according to which the universe exists exclusively for humans. It's just for our benefit. So the atheist, the naturalist, is basically alleging that the Bible should lead us to expect a universe that exists solely for our comfort and for our benefit. And the other thing I think that the objection presupposes is that the universe is way bigger than it would need to be if it was all just for us. Now, very briefly, I want to suggest that these assumptions can be very much challenged. So does the Bible really teach that the universe exists exclusively for our benefit? I don't think that's clear at all. The book of Job has often been seen as presenting the universe as having aspects of it that are way outside of our comprehension, and that the way that God seems to talk about all sorts of aspects of creation that are there just for his enjoyment, not because they bring any sort of comfort or benefit to us. As God says in his long speech to Job at the end, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons? Or lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? And so on. This doesn't strike me as a picture of a God who has created the universe exclusively for us. Yes, humans are very important and have a special role in the biblical picture, but I don't think that the Bible presents this completely anthropocentric view where the universe exists only for us. The other thing that's relevant here, I think, are the findings in physics about the fine-tuning of the universe. In short, the idea is that there are all sorts of constants, various parameters pertaining to the structure, the fundamental structure of the universe. For example, the cosmological constant, the rate at which the universe expands, the strength of the force of gravity, and at least a couple of dozen other things such as that are basically balanced on a knife edge, such that if they were different by even the tiniest amount, the universe would end up sort of empty or completely uninteresting, maybe just full of hydrogen, nothing else. Certainly no galaxies, stars, and planets. And actually, these fine-tuning findings suggest that you would need a universe that's roughly as large as the one that we seem to inhabit in order to have the conditions in place for life of our sort to emerge. And what's more, these fine-tuning findings cast grave doubt on the idea that naturalism would predict a universe that contains any life at all. So, to conclude this part very briefly, it seems to me that actually, when we probe a bit deeper, this data point, the vastness and the age of the universe, seems to be something that's much more to be expected on theism than it is on naturalism. If anything, it's evidence against naturalism and for theism. Okay, let's turn to the second objection, the second charge against theism. Namely that science is progressively edging God out, making God redundant as an explanation. This thought is often epitomized by the story, it's probably apocryphal, who knows, but it's an interesting one, that when the Emperor Napoleon was surveying a model of the solar system that had been built by one of his scientists, Pierre-Simon Laplace, Napoleon said, this is marvelous, but where does God come into this? To which Laplace replied famously, I have no need for that hypothesis. So the idea is that science progressively comes up with physicalist explanations of phenomena that used to puzzle us and cause us to posit supernatural agency. And as it does so, theism is being edged progressively out of the picture until it's almost falling out of view. And this is a very, very popular picture in our culture today. Now, of course, what this thought presupposes is that science has already or is on the verge of explaining some of the most striking phenomenon in the universe, consciousness, which John talked about at length earlier, the origin of life, and indeed the origin of the universe. But actually, I think it's enormously open to question that science is anywhere near explaining these things, or indeed that it even could in principle. Just to take one of these, consciousness, what seems most striking to many people in the field of philosophy of mind, including many non-theists, is the fact that consciousness essentially has this private, subjective, first-person quality, what it feels like to be me, what it feels like to taste coffee, such that no purely third-person description of reality will ever be able to comprehend that first-person experience, those qualia, as philosophers call them. And similar points, I think, could be made about origins of life and the fine-tuning of the universe. A friend of mine, the philosopher Timothy McGrew, puts it like this: the idea that there is some pre-specified set of gaps in our knowledge that scientific research is systematically closing one by one is historically and scientifically naive. We are in a better position today to appreciate the enormous distance between chemistry and consciousness, between inorganic molecules and the simplest forms of life, between randomness and information than ever before. Science closes some gaps, but it opens others. Now, I want to, in closing, focus on one further very striking data point, one that is almost universally ignored by those advocating this naturalistic triumph narrative. And that is the fact that we can even do science at all. The philosopher Edwin Burt suggested that there are at least two things that science presupposes, it takes for granted. It can't explain these things because they are the very conditions of our being able to do science at all. And what I want to suggest is that both of these things make much more sense. They're much more what you would expect to find in a universe created by God than in a naturalistic universe. So as for the first, the fact that the universe appears to be governed by some extraordinarily simple and elegant equations, the fact that some estimated 10 to the 80 atoms in the universe all behave in uniform ways, these are remarkable facts that we should stop to be amazed by. And I can't see any reason for thinking that those things would be what you would expect to find in a fundamentally purposeless, non-conscious universe. On the other hand, they are what you would expect to find in a universe created by the kind of God described by the biblical account. And precisely this was what gave such confidence to many of the pioneers of the scientific revolution. They had such confidence that the world would conform to simple and elegant patterns that could be mathematically modeled. How about our minds and their fittedness to comprehend the fundamental structure of the universe? And here again, it seems to me that naturalism has a real problem. This is something that's been developed at length into an argument by the American philosopher Alvin Plantinga, who argues that naturalism actually saws off the branch on which it is sitting, because in positing that our minds have been fundamentally put together by a blind process which has no comprehension of the end towards which it is leading, should really destabilize our confidence in our own rational faculties. And indeed, he suggests that naturalism is, for that reason, self-defeating. But lest you think that it's only a Christian philosopher like Plantinga who would say this, the atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel says this: if we came to believe that our capacity for objective theory, in other words, for having true beliefs about the structure of the world, if we came to believe that that were the product of natural selection, that would warrant serious skepticism about its results. And so again, it seems to me that this other data point, this presupposition that science must take for granted if it's to get off the ground at all, is something that makes far more sense in a theistic universe than in a naturalistic universe. So I think whilst on the surface this triumph narrative in which theism is being edged out of the picture until it almost falls off, has a kind of surface appeal to it. As Stephen Hawking puts it, science will win, i.e. against theism, because it works. But what this way of thinking about the question, this way of framing it, completely neglects is the question, but why does it work? Thank you very much.
Hey guys, how are we doing? My name's Nadia and I'm part of OCCA, the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. And we just want to say thank you for watching our video. At OCCA, we love to look into the big questions facing our time and our culture to see how the Christian faith gives answers that are both rational and rich in their understanding. If you enjoyed this video and you want to come along with us, then why not check out the rest of the content on this channel? Please consider subscribing and following as well, so that we can keep on making content like this. We really want to hear from you guys, so if you have ideas of questions that we can look into or content that we can make, then please drop a comment down below or get in touch with us directly. We want to say thank you as well to the speakers, to the donors, to the filmmakers, and also to you guys for making it happen. You know, it takes about 60 hours to create a film like this, and that's because we want it to be carefully researched. We want the talk to flow beautifully, and we want the filmmaking to be smooth. But that all takes time. And here at OCCA, our staff are funded by people who share our vision. So if you want to partner with the work that we are doing, please consider donating. I'll catch you next time.